Hey everyone, welcome to Middle School Youth. And if you can believe it, this will actually be our last Middle School Youth in May. It is June 1st as of tomorrow. And I kind of want to talk about that because typically our Middle School Youth program only runs until the month of June. Now, of course, things are a little bit different this year. Normally we would go on our retreat and then come back and kind of have a wind-up party here back at the church the following Sunday. And then we would get into our church-wide block party. Now, none of that is happening this year. And so things are obviously going to look a little bit different. Here's what I want to say. We're going to do Middle School Youth this Sunday and next Sunday. And then the Sunday after that, because our Manitoba government is allowing parties of 50 people to gather outdoors, as long as we're social distancing, of course, I want to try and do something outdoors as kind of like a wind-up party for middle school youth. So stay tuned. I'll email your parents about that, but that's not going to be happening for another 2 weeks just because I want enough time to plan and make it something that's special for you guys. So all that being said, I do want to get into this week's video. Something funny happened this week. A middle school student, actually Otis and his brother Levi, volunteered to do milkshake roulette. I thought they were a little crazy to volunteer for something like that, but they said, hey, I want to do it. And so I said, okay. So coming up in this week's segment of Milkshake Roulette, we've got Otis and his brother Levi.
Ew.
Ready?
Strawberries.
Ready?
And blueberries.
Are you ready?
In goes the mango. In goes almond milk.
Good healthy.
And in goes the apple cider vinegar.
No. Woo. Good.
Can't wait to try it. Yay. Smells interesting. Looks really good.
Come on. Stop.
Bruh.
Don't drink. Mmm. You guys want to try this?
Do you like it?
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Mmm.
Want to try?
No.
Yeah, it's a good smoothie.
Well, thanks for doing that, you two. I think I've said this before, but I actually filmed the video in which I'm talking right now before I received the footage from Otis and Levi. So I'm assuming that was gross. I heard about the ingredients and it sounds like it was not a good tasting milkshake. So coming up next is God in My Life. And I feel like we've done this segment many times before. So I just want to give you guys a quick reminder of why we really do God in My Life. This is a time for your leaders to just talk about how God is working in their lives. And that seems simple, But what I want you guys to get out of it is that God continues to work in our lives each and every day. And so your leaders sharing is just them kind of telling about how our very active God who does things in our lives is working in their lives. So this week we've got Perry, and she's going to be sharing just that.
Hey guys, so today I'm filming God in my life and talking about the things that I've been learning from God recently. And I think that this is something that this time in quarantine has actually been super beneficial, and I think maybe I've talked about this a little bit before, but just having time every day has been super huge to just spend time in the Word and reading through Scripture. I read through the book of Hebrews, and that was just like a really good thing to do, to focus on just a chapter a day, reading through that. But more specifically, I think in this past 2 weeks now, I've been back at work and working regularly and having more of that routine and being able to recognize just the importance that rest is. And I think that that's something that God has been showing me just this whole 2-month quarantine experience, is just that how much He desires us to rest and use this time for our growth and for our benefit. So that's been something that I think that I've been learning a lot recently. Specifically, this quote that I heard from a podcast recently was relating to quarantine, and it says to use this time to secure undistracted devotion to God. And that's been huge for me to cling on to use this time to just really lean into that. Another thing is just, the importance of prayer, and that's been a habit that I've been trying to continue to increase and just spend more focused energy on prayer. That's kind of what I've been learning and practicing recently.
Hey, it's great to see that you're spending time during quarantine growing closer to God, Perry. So thanks for sharing. You might notice that I am back at my apartment now, and that's because I got home and I realized that I wanted to do something different with this week's Teach than what I had originally planned. So here's what I want to talk about. Heaven is this thing that many Christians and most people in general think about often, maybe even more often now that we're all in quarantine. It's where many of us think we go when we die. It's where God is supposed to be. It's kind of like this supernatural thing that can be kind of confusing. And how do we as Christians really think about heaven, and how do we interact with heaven when we actually live on earth, where things are not always, pretty much most of the time, not heaven-like? This is a really complicated topic, and I found a video from the Bible Project that makes it really simple. What I love about this video is it actually focuses on Jesus and how He can help us experience heaven on earth. It also talks about how we as Christians can partner with Jesus and spread heaven on earth as His followers. So I'm going to play the video. It's about 6 minutes, and then I'll see you after.
So in the Bible, the ideas of heaven and earth are ways of talking about God's space and our space.
So I understand our space really well. We live here. There's trees, rivers, mountains. But my understanding of God's space gets a little fuzzy.
And what we do get in the Bible are images trying to help us grasp God's space, which is basically inconceivable to us.
So these are two very different types of spaces.
Yes, they're different in their nature, but here's what's really interesting is that in the Bible, these are not always separate spaces. So think of heaven and earth as like different dimensions that can overlap in the same exact space.
So we talk a lot about going to heaven after we die, but this idea of heaven and earth overlapping, we don't talk a lot about that.
Which is kind of crazy because the union of heaven and earth is what the story of the Bible is all about. How they were once fully united and then driven apart, and about how God is bringing them back together once again.
So let's go back to the beginning. where heaven and earth, they're completely overlapping?
Yeah, this is what the Bible's description of the Garden of Eden is all about. It's a place where God and humanity dwelt together perfectly, no separation, and humans then partner with God in building a flourishing, beautiful world and so on.
But as humans, we wanted to do things a different way. We wanted God out, and we wanted to create a world apart from him.
Yeah, so we have these two spaces now. And the Bible actually uses lots of different kinds of words and phrases to refer to these two spaces to make a clear distinction.
So you've said that these spaces can overlap, though. So explain how that works.
Yeah, this is where we have to start talking about temples. Because in the biblical world, you experience God's presence by going to a temple. That's where heaven and earth overlap.
Now, there are two types of temples described in the Bible. One is a tabernacle, basically a tent that was built by Moses. And the other was this massive building made by Solomon.
And these temples were decorated with fruit trees and flowers and images of angels and all kinds of gold and jewels and so on. And these are designed to make you feel like you're going back to the garden. And at the center of the temple was a place called the Holy of Holies, which was like the hot spot of God's presence.
Now we can go and be with God again.
But not so fast, because the temple also creates a problem. So God's space is full of his presence and goodness and justice and beauty, but human space is full of sin and injustice and the ugliness that results.
So how do these spaces overlap if they're so different and they're in conflict with each other?
This was resolved through animal sacrifice.
Yeah, that's kind of weird. What do animal sacrifices have to do with this?
Yeah, the idea is this. Animal sacrifices, somehow they absorb the sin when the animal dies in your place. And it creates a clean space, so to speak, where you are now free to enter into the temple and be in God's presence.
Okay, so if I'm an Israelite and I live in Jerusalem, I might be able to be in God's presence. But you said the story of the Bible is all of heaven and earth reuniting.
Right. So we have to keep going in the story where we come to Jesus in the New Testament. And in the Gospel of John, we hear this claim that God became human in Jesus and made his dwelling among us. Now, this word dwelling is really curious. It means he set up a tabernacle among us. And so what John is claiming right here is that Jesus is a temple. He is now the place where heaven and earth overlap.
What's interesting about Jesus is that he isn't staying in this safe, clean space. He's running around hanging out with sinners. He's healing people of their sicknesses and forgiving people of their sins.
He's basically creating little pockets of heaven where people can be in God's presence, but he's doing it out there in the middle of the world of sin and death.
And he keeps telling everyone that the kingdom of heaven is at hand.
And he even told his followers to pray regularly that God's kingdom come and that his will be done here on earth just as it is in heaven.
But a lot of people are threatened by Jesus and they kill him, which seems to spoil this whole plan to reunite heaven and earth.
But we have to go back to a scene earlier on in Jesus' story where John the Baptist saw Jesus and said, "Behold, this is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world."
So Jesus isn't just talked about as being a temple, he's also talked about as being the temple sacrifice.
Yeah, so the cross is now the place where Jesus absorbs sin to create a clean space that is not limited like animal sacrifices. Jesus' sacrifice has the power to keep spreading and reuniting more and more of heaven and earth.
And this is all really great, but it leaves one big question in my mind, which is, what happens when I die? Don't I just fly over to God's space to be with Jesus?
Yeah, so a few times in the New Testament, we learn that Christians will be with Jesus in heaven after they die, but that is not the focus of the Bible story. The focus is on how heaven and earth are being reunited through Jesus and will be completely brought together one day when he returns. So in the book of Revelation, we get this beautiful image of the Garden of Eden, now in the form of a city, coming to end the age of sin and death by redeeming all of human history in a renewed creation. And God's space and human space completely overlap once again.
That's it for the video this week. I'll see you guys in the Zoom meeting. We'll play a couple games, and then we'll go into small groups. We'll have a couple questions, and we can hang out there. I'll see you soon.